Over the years, games have come out that ended up feeling disappointing. Sequels and reboots in particular seem to be the worst offenders. I'm sure that you've played a game you absolutely loved, and then when a new entry was announced, you became super excited, only for that new game to not live up to you and other fans' expectations. Sometimes that is entirely the fault of lazy development, but more times than not, rushed deadlines and publisher restrictions are the cause of these less than satisfactory games. Sometimes these games are more divisive than bad, and people actually love them or hate them because they feel different than previous entries. SpongeBob SquarePants, creature from the Krusty Krab, is probably the biggest example I can think of in the SpongeBob game community. It was the first platformer in the series to be made by a company other than Heavy Iron Studios in a few years. There was Lights Camera Pants that was developed by an in-house THQ studio, but it was a party game, so people looked at it differently. Kids and adults had fallen in love with Heavy Iron's 3D platformer style, and it's easy to see why a follow-up made by a different company would be divisive. Personally, I never actually played the console version growing up. I had the DS version instead, and I enjoyed it enough at the time. It was actually the first game I got with my DS. Years later, I've learned people were not fans of the console version. But was it really that bad? Well, I decided to play it myself for the first time, and afterwards I did some digging to learn why and how this game was made. Interestingly enough, I was given some development materials that show SpongeBob Creature from the Krusty Krab was originally supposed to be a radically different game. Today we will take a look at the company that made this game, the game itself, and the game's development to try and uncover some of the secrets behind how it was made, and what the original vision was supposed to be. I think you'd be surprised at just how rich and interesting the history behind the developer is. In fact, there's so much detail that I'm going to have to gloss over a lot of it. But trust me, I won't leave out anything important. In 1967, in a town called Birkenhead, England, two twin boys named Philip and Andrew Oliver were born to the world. Philip was technically older, arriving 35 minutes before his brother. Even their own mother had trouble telling them apart. I'm sure their parents couldn't be happier to add these two to their family, but I don't think they ever could have predicted just how much of an impact their new children would make on the world of entertainment. In the early years of their life, they were forced to move around quite a bit, as their father, Malcolm Oliver, was a naval architect, and this job didn't keep him in one place for very long. It wasn't until 1977 that the family was really able to settle down in one place, a small town known as Trowbridge. From a relatively young age, Philip and Andrew developed a deep fascination with computer games. In 1979, their parents had given them a Merlin handheld, which was an almost cell phone-shaped device with nothing but buttons and a speaker that could play simple, rudimentary games. This was their first gaming experience, but it wasn't until they encountered a Space Invaders arcade cabinet at their local supermarket that the obsession truly took hold. The idea of video games had now taken root in their young minds, and they now felt a void that their parents attempted to fill by getting them a Pong clone console known as the Interstate for Christmas. This console didn't really scratch the gaming itch they were feeling, but shortly after that, their school class took a trip to the Yeovil Aerodrome, where they encountered the arcade games Battlezone and Tailgunner. They were amazed by its 3D vector graphics, which likely seemed pretty impressive at the time. The only thing they knew for sure at this point is that they wanted more. The Oliver twins spent the summer break of 1981 playing more arcade games such as Pac-Man at a resort. What they really wanted though was to bring these arcade experiences home with a computer. In the first few years of the 80s, personal computers were still extremely rare. At that point, they were more luxuries for the wealthy rather than the near necessities that they are today. However, Philip and Andrew were lucky enough to have a friend from school that could give them the home gaming experience they wanted. The twins knew Ivan Link from their school in Trowbridge. They had been good friends since the age of 9. His father was a professor that taught math and science at a local college, and the nature of this work led him to become one of the early owners of a home computer, the Apple II. Ivan gladly showed them the games he had available for the computer when his father allowed. The lineup consisted of a pinball game called Night Mission, the classic text-based adventure Zork, and their personal favorite, a Pac-Man clone called Taxman. Together, the three boys spent hours upon hours playing these games, often staying up well into the night. It could be said that this was an ultimate defining moment for the Oliver twins, and led them to the path they would follow for their entire lives. After all of these various gaming experiences, Philip and Andrew knew one thing: they wanted to make games. In December of 1981, the Olivers' older brother Martin purchased a used Sinclair ZX81 for £50. This was exciting for the twins, as they were allowed to use it when their brother wasn't. They pored over the manual and tried every game listing available to them. The Sinclair ZX81 was not the greatest computer around, and therefore had many limitations, but the boys did what they could with it, often trying to adapt existing game code to add their own features, or even create their own rudimentary programs such as Pong. While adapting and creating these simple games was an enjoyable experience for the twins, they wanted more, and they were given the opportunity to further their programming knowledge in 1982. There was a college next door to their school that offered to teach a computer class to the younger students of their neighbor. The Oliver twins obviously joined, and they learned a lot. But the problem was, the computer they had at home just had too many limitations for them to really utilize these new skills. They began to look into finding a new, better computer, and decided on the soon-to-be-released Dragon 32, because of its better features such as color, and a far more adequate keyboard. They attempted to convince their parents to buy it, but when it became clear that wouldn't happen, as it was a whopping £200, they got a job delivering newspapers, and saved more money from doing odd jobs around their house. They were able to save up £100 by August, but their parents decided that they would pay the rest as an early birthday present. This way they could buy the computer the day it came out. Unfortunately, the Dragon 32 didn't have very many games available, but in a way the twins saw this as a good thing, because once the thrill of playing what was available wore off, they spent all of their free time learning how to program things themselves on their new toy. After they felt proficient in programming for the Dragon, and because there were so few game listings available for it, they decided they would try to write their own brand new game, and actually attempt to get it published. After brainstorming, they decided to write a procedurally generated top-down racing game that they dubbed Roadrunner. When it was completed, instead of putting the game on a cassette, they actually had to have their mother type out their game code manually on a typewriter, so that they could send it in to Computer and Video Games magazine. This must have been a tedious and painstaking process for their mother, especially because she had to do it multiple times because of mistakes she made the first time around. But eventually she managed it, and they sent the game out in November of 1982. They wouldn't hear anything more about it for nearly a year, when they received a letter from the magazine, saying they liked the game and wanted to publish it for £10. They happily agreed, and in December of 1983, the game finally appeared in the magazine, though they had to send in multiple letters to actually get them to pay them their £10, 5 months later. At this point, Philip and Andrew didn't even own their Dragon 32 anymore. After realizing there just wasn't a big market for the computer, they decided to trade it in for a BBC Model B, which was significantly more expensive at £399. But between the trade-in and their parents loaning them the rest, it was an easier purchase than the Dragon 32 had been. As the boys were approaching the age of 15, they started watching a new Saturday morning live studio show called simply The Saturday Show. This show covered lots of various topics that were popular with children of the time, and then one week, they announced the Design a Game competition. Philip and Andrew, having just purchased their BBC Model B, obviously leapt at the chance to enter. Their programming knowledge at this point, however, left them limited in what they could achieve, so rather than try to create a poor quality arcade game, they chose to make a board game. They wrote the game in just a couple weeks, named it Strategy, and sent it in with a little fuzzy bug with googly eyes attached to it, so that it would stand out amongst the others. They joked in their letter that it was a programming bug they had found while creating their game. After a couple weeks, when they had just gotten home from school for the day, they received a phone call, letting them know that they had won the competition. They were told they needed to travel to the studio of the show the Friday evening of that week, and that all of their expenses would be paid for. They stayed in the Rotunda Hotel the evening before, and got up early to go be in the live filming of the show as general audience members. Other guests that were going to be in this particular episode included the Harlem Globetrotters and Gary Newman. When the show took a break to cut to a cartoon, the twins set up a computer and TV in front of the stage in order to present their winning creation to the world.
Time to find out who's won our computer competition. You remember a few weeks ago we asked you to design a game and send it in either as a drawing or else as a cassette. Well, our computer competition winners, Philip and Andrew Oliver from Trowbridge in Wiltshire. Where are they? Come on down, you guys. Let's have a look. Why not go either side? One either side. That's it. Somebody over with Chris. You come over here with me. That's it. That's splendid. Which is which?
I'm Andrew. I'm Philip.
Andrew and Philip. All right.
Why did you actually write it, and what was the basis for it?
Well, a lot of people have been trying to write arcade games in BASIC, which are far too slow, and we really thought we couldn't get one sort of a high enough quality, so we had to turn to a slow game, sort of more family game, and we came up with this idea after playing some board games.
Okay, I mean, how did you actually go about designing the game and actually putting it into the computer? Do you have any problems as you put it together?
Well, I wrote it on paper and my brother typed it in. We tested it, found hundreds of mistakes, and after sort of a week of work, we managed to iron most of them out.
Great.
You've got to try and get each player into the middle, and you're only allowed to turn a corner at the end of a dice shake or when you hit a wall.
What are these guys' prizes anyway? And I know that everybody will be green with envy. They got a nice computer of their own at home, so we said, why don't you choose another prize? And you've decided to go for what's called a high-resolution monitor, whatever that is, for goodness sake. I suppose you lot know. Sounds like something who collects the rubbers at the end of class. But anyway, a high-resolution monitor, and also the possibility that top manufacturers Commodore are going to market your game and it'll actually appear on the high street. So once again, congratulations to the winners of our computer competition, the Olivers!
This TV appearance made them famous among their peers at school. When they returned that Monday morning, they were bombarded by other students, telling them they had seen them on TV, and others asking them what it was like. From then on, they were known as the, quote, game-making geeks by all the kids at school. Philip and Andrew didn't see this as an insult, however, and they took pride in the title. After winning the competition and getting their 15 seconds of fame, the boys believed the next logical step was to attempt to get this board game title published. They made some small improvements and sent it to the biggest publisher of the platform, Acornsoft. In late September of 1983, they heard back from Acornsoft, and they offered £1,200 or a 7.5% royalty for the game. But they had one stipulation. They wanted the twins to change the name of the game. The Olivers obliged and came up with the alternate title, Gambit. Unfortunately, it took quite a while before Philip and Andrew would see Gambit finally published in March 1984. And it was ultimately a disappointment, as it was bundled together with another game, which means they received only half of the royalty they were promised. Over the next couple of years, the Olivers would create and publish several various games, and an art program that allowed them to create better graphics for their titles. By 1986, they had graduated from school, and their parents pushed them to go off to college. But the boys didn't really want to. They were more interested in making games. So after spending the summer putting together a business plan to start making games full-time, they convinced their parents to let them have 1 year to prove themselves in their dream career. The clear problem is they would need to be making plenty of money on each game that they released. In September of that year, a computer trade show called ECTS was being held in London, and they believed this was the perfect time to pitch a game to publishers. When the show came around and the brothers attended, they ended up meeting David and Richard Darling. They were also a team of young brothers who had previously written games for a company called Mastertronics, but now they were forming their own publishing company dubbed Codemasters. The Darlings were impressed with the Olivers' previous work, and wanted them to work with them on a game called Super Robin Hood, which they projected to sell at least 100,000 copies, which is exactly what Philip and Andrew needed, as they would be making 10% royalties on every copy sold. They worked on the game out of their bedroom, still sharing one computer between the two of them, but after only a month they had their first #1 charting game on their hands, and Codemasters wanted to continue working with them. They would go on to create other big sellers, such as an original title called Ghost Hunters and Grand Prix Simulator, the latter of which almost got Codemasters into legal trouble with Activision, because it was a top-down racing game that looked similar to a game Activision had just published, Super Sprint. The Darling brothers refused to take this game off the market though, as they knew that Activision didn't really have legal legs to stand on, and the controversy propelled sales to 250,000 copies. Philip and Andrew had gone from the handful of money they were making on their early games to thousands on every title they released, and the press took notice, publishing articles calling the twins, quote, whiz kids. Their next game would go on to be what many consider to be the Oliver twins' true legacy, Dizzy. Yep, that Dizzy. Based on a simple cartoon egg who rolls around, it went on to be a huge seller, and many sequels and spin-offs would be made in the next several years, such as Treasure Island Dizzy, Dizzy Panic, and Crystal Kingdom Dizzy. In America, the games are probably pretty obscure, but they were fairly popular in the mostly computer-based gaming market of the UK. In 1989, after releasing a couple more various titles like Jet Ski Simulator and a Pac-Man clone based around Dizzy called Fast Food, they were approached to create a Spectrum and Amstrad computer version of the Ghostbusters 2 game. Ultimately though, this ended in a court case with Stefan Yufnowski, the man who brought them into the project, due to him not paying them for their work. They did win the case, but Stefan declared bankruptcy, meaning they never got a cent. Around this time, it was becoming increasingly clear that the platforms and formats they had been releasing their games on were dying, and the Olivers and Codemasters would need to adapt. After a failed push to put their games on CDs, Codemasters believed that the next path needed to be game consoles, specifically the Nintendo Entertainment System. The NES was not popular in Europe at all at the time, but it was huge overseas in America, so the Oliver twins created a version of Treasure Island Dizzy for the system, with the help of some Codemasters engineers. It was around the same time that Andrew assisted in the development of the Game Genie, a popular cheat device, which would be quite controversial with Nintendo, and even lead to legal battles. The Treasure Island Dizzy port would later be released as a part of Quattro Games, published by Codemasters' Canadian partner and US distributor, Camerica. The interesting thing about Camerica and Codemasters is that their NES games were not licensed by Nintendo, opting to use cheaper, generic carts that had the ability to break through the NES's famous lockout chip. So needless to say, the Game Genie controversy was far from their first legal run-in with the Big N. Philip and Andrew went on to have much success, and also many issues working with Codemasters and Camerica on the NES. And in late 1990, to establish some more independence, they formed Interactive Studios. Shortly thereafter, they set up their own office, and hired some of the people they had already been working with to fill it. They did continue working with Codemasters, but they likely felt a bigger sense of freedom, being in their own building and working with their own employees. The start of their success with Codemasters had begun with Super Robin Hood, as we have already established. So the Olivers believed it would be a good idea to make a version for the NES called Robin Hood Legend Quest. When it was released, it wasn't really a hit. Part of this can be attributed to Nintendo pushing retailers to not stock the unlicensed cartridges that Codemasters produced. Perhaps in response to this, Codemasters came up with a way to release games even cheaper than the carts they were already making, but it still wouldn't be officially licensed. Enter the Aladdin Deck Enhancer. This notorious little device was created to insert into the NES, and then use much smaller $12 carts that usually contain multiple games. There are plenty of videos that already exist about this product, so I won't go much deeper into it than that. I recommend the Gaming Historian's video on it if you want to learn more of the details. Basically, this device was a failure, and some people say it was never even officially released before Camerica went bankrupt. Codemasters did still exist after this, but the relationship Philip and Andrew had with them began to crumble when they tried converting their Dizzy games to Sega systems. There was poor communication, loss of employees, and lack of money to pay even themselves, and so the Olivers reached the decision in 1993 to split from Codemasters and continue with their own company alone. The Sega Dizzy conversions were never released. The issue now was that Interactive Studios needed a publisher to release their games. While preparing to present their fledgling company at CES, a trade show that took place in Las Vegas, they ended up reaching out to an old contact, Jackie Lyons, an agent in the game industry. She gladly agreed to represent them, and shortly after that they were given various opportunities to work on various games, such as Marco's Magic Football and Judge Dredd. This work led them to get a contract from BGM to create Fyro and Claude, an original cops and robbers game that they enjoyed working on much more than the last few games that they had. The work from this contract led them to be picked to create a game based on the 80s movie War Games. This title launched interactive studios into the mainstream. But after this, the Oliver twins became much less hands-on, mostly managing the business side of things while their employees wrote the games. From here, the history gets kind of foggy, so I apologize if there isn't much to say about the next era of their story, but I'll continue with what I do know. Interactive Studios went on to create many popular and cult license games, the first of which being Glover for the N64 in 1999, which was also released on the PlayStation later on. I would love to start blabbing about Glover for a while in this video, but I don't think it's a good idea at this time. So maybe I'll do a separate video someday on this fantastic and frustrating platformer. Shortly after Glover, the company's name was changed to Blitz Games, and they would go on to develop a ton more games like Frogger 2, The Fairly OddParents Breakin' the Rules and Shadow Showdown, and Pac-Man World 3. Then, in 2005, Blitz Games would attend a meeting with THQ at E3 in order to pitch their idea for the next entry in the popular SpongeBob SquarePants series. Blitz Games and THQ had a solid relationship, having worked together on quite a few titles, and Blitz Games had already worked with the Nickelodeon property, being the Fairly OddParents, so it's likely THQ didn't have to give much thought at all on who should create the next title for their most popular cartoon. In fact, THQ hired them to create the next 2 games in the series before they were even sure what those would be. They only knew what years they would release, 2006 and 2007. During this meeting, THQ explained to Blitz Games that they had a close relationship with Nintendo and wanted this next game to be a launch title on the Revolution, which was later revealed as the Wii. This meant that while whatever they made would be multi-platform, it needed to have the most emphasis put on the new motion-based platform. The working title for Blitz Games' first theoretical SpongeBob game was SpongeBob 40 Winks. It was meant to be a grand adventure into the world of SpongeBob's friends' dreams. Joining me today to tell you about the game's initial concept is Riders DX.
Hey y'all, my name is Riders DX and I'll be helping out with presenting some of the juicy details here of a creature from the Krusty Krab. SpongeBob SquarePants, 40 Winks. SpongeBob wakes up one morning to discover his friends are trapped in their sleep. He soon realizes he must jump into their dreams and wake them up or they'll sleep forever, and he'll be the loneliest sponge on the block. Play as SpongeBob and his friends in a story-driven action-adventure that takes place within the dreams of your favorite Bikini Bottom characters, compete in Sandy's Olympic sports fantasy, spend Krab's money faster than he can make it, and overcome Plankton's cloned army of doom. Experience a unique mechanic of being able to go in and out of the different dreams into the real Bikini Bottom. What happens in one crazy dream can affect the real world. SpongeBob can transform into crazy shapes just like in the TV show, from a bowling ball to a protective umbrella, even a surfboard. Do whatever is required to find a way out of the crazy dreams. 40 Winks allowed you to see the world of SpongeBob as you've never seen it before. Game summary. To wake up his friends in time, SpongeBob must enter the weird and wonderful world of their dreams. He must find out what will shock each character into waking up before he ends up being the last sponge in Bikini Bottom. This time, SpongeBob is not on his own. He has the ability to work with his friends for each challenge as he explores each dream world. Using the power of dreams, they can team up and use crazy mechanics and shape-changing abilities to explore the worlds and have fun together. Each dream features fresh locations and new challenges for SpongeBob to complete, from base jumping with Sandy, collecting Mr. Krab's treasure, or capturing the Plankton army one by one, to making and serving patties in the Krusty Krab HQ, or turning into a paintbrush and painting a masterpiece for Squidward. There is a never-ending stream of challenges that he and his friends need to face. Character-focused levels. The game will feature a diverse collection of visually compelling levels inspired by some of the best-loved characters from the SpongeBob world. Each level is designed specifically to both reflect and enhance the character-based theme and core play experience. Sponge-wrenching transformations. From incredible sponge stretch action moves to shape-shifting object transformations, SpongeBob now has the freedom to be anything he wants. Companion play. SpongeBob won't be alone on this great adventure. Famous Bikini Bottom inhabitants will accompany SpongeBob throughout the game as surprising new duo-up play mechanics make an appearance. Some will be friends, whilst others will only be strategic alliances, allowing them to achieve a common goal through collaborative action. Supporting cast minigames. For the first time, the support stars from the show will inspire a whole raft of permanently unlockable minigames. From jellyfish hopping to clamshell bongos and even snail racing, this game will honor the smaller inhabitants of Bikini Bay. Real-time comedy with all the characters. As SpongeBob will have a companion with him at all times, we can capitalize on the wacky humor of the show with real-time character interaction and comedy. Using the original voice actors from the show will mean true authenticity and one-liners at any time during the game. varied, and exciting gameplay mechanics. Every dream will feature gameplay sequences and mechanics that will be unique to the SpongeBob title. From goose surfing and riding the milkshake rapids to painting a masterpiece or milking jellyfish, there will always be something to keep the player excited. SpongeBob universe like you have never seen it before. Unique locations created specifically for the game based around the dreams and desires of all the SpongeBob characters from the show. From extreme sports and Sandy's dream to the world domination of Plankton, no two dreams are alike. Cross-title save system to unlock extra bonuses. Owning another Nickelodeon title will mean that extra bonuses and gameplay experiences will be unlocked for the true fan. This can even be compatible with previous SpongeBob titles and forthcoming Nickelodeon games. Transformations. SpongeBob will be able to transform into many cool shapes and objects which the player can use to solve challenges. Here are some initial examples. Sticky ball. SpongeBob becomes a giant sticky ball which is used to pick stuff up. Surfboard. Turn into a surfboard and surf those goo waves. Super net. Become a giant net and run around catching stuff. Paintbrush. Spread paint around and create a cool mess. Bowling ball. Use this to knock down opponents or walls. Giant Krabby Patty. Use this to lead Patrick around the world. Game structure. The game is split into a series of dreams which the player can enter after completing the tutorial of SpongeBob's dream. SpongeBob's dream tutorial. SpongeBob dreams of being an international film star, jumps between crazy movie ideas in his typically random dream. He becomes an astronaut, a cowboy, and a cop as he and Patrick think of ever crazier ideas. This is the first level in the game and will feature an exciting opening such as a fast-paced chase or driving sequence. Companion character Patrick, as of course SpongeBob would dream of his best friend. Example game mechanics. Driving. Drive a cop car in the cop section and chase the bad guys. Magnetic boots. Defy the lack of gravity in the astronaut section. Patrick's dream, P's of the action. The only thing Patrick is dreaming about tonight is food, and his dream world is a candy shop heaven with milkshake rivers, candy cane trees, and marshmallow clouds. The only way to get Patrick to wake up is to make him need a pee. You must encourage Patrick to drink from the lemonade lagoons, cola pools, and smoothie fountains in the world's... I'm sorry. Okay. I'm so sorry. This is so funny. Holy crap. Okay. The only way to get Patrick to wake up is to make him need a pee. You must encourage Patrick to drink from the lemonade lagoons, cola pools, and smoothie fountains in the world's first bladder-based gameplay. Companion character. Patrick is a companion for this dream as he doesn't have the imagination to dream of any other friends. Example game mechanics. Follow my Patty. Turn SpongeBob into a giant Krabby Patty to lead a hungry Patrick around the level and away from all of his favorite foods. Milkshake Rapids. SpongeBob becomes a raft and must navigate the milkshake rapids, avoiding the candy crocs, rock cakes, and chocolate logs in a bid to taste sweet victory. Plankton's dream, world domination. Entering into Plankton's dream was always going to be dangerous. In his world, Plankton has turned into a giant Godzilla-type monster and is preparing to release his clone army on the inhabitants of Bikini Bottom, as seen in the episode Plankton's Army. Companion character Mr. Krabs, who can't resist entering the dream of his major competitor. Example game mechanics. Net. SpongeBob turns into a giant net and can race around to capture Plankton's clones. Krabs Patty Pound. Teamwork at its best. Run around the Plankton army using a bubble blower to circle them in air bubbles. Mr. Krabs pounds the ground and wham! All cadets are captured in a giant bubble. Sandy's dream, gold medal gal. Sandy's dream is huge, floating islands of Texas in the sky with cacti, deserts, and ramshackled old buildings. Sandy is relaxing inside her giant golden sports trophy at the end of the level, convinced that no one can beat her extreme sports records. Companion character Pearl. SpongeBob turns into a snail and windsurfs on her back. Example game mechanics. Base jumping, sandboarding, goo windsurfing, extreme steeplechase. Squidward's dream, for art's sake. The Squidward School of Arts. Squidward is the headmaster and loves his work. Join in with the cultured art task to shock Squidward into waking up, as there's no way that he is going to like SpongeBob gate crashing. Companion character. Patrick helped SpongeBob out of this situation by ensuring that Squidward is truly irritated with these two running around. Example game mechanics. Clamshell crescendo. Jump on clams to make not so beautiful music together. Pogo paint. SpongeBob transforms into a giant rubber stamp and must paint the floor mural as quickly as possible. Mr. Krabs' dream. Money Makes the World Go Round. Set in Eugene's own twisted version of Bikini Bottom where he owns every shop and street and lives in a large mansion at the heart of the town. The only way he's going to wake up is if you start spending all of his money. To get into the mansion, SpongeBob must buy new clothes and dress up as a local aristocrat complete with top hat and tails to get past the doorman and finally confront Mr. Krabs. Companion character. Squidward appears in the stream to help SpongeBob rescue their boss and save their jobs. Example game mechanics. Metal detecting, find Krabs' stashes. Patty service, make burgers for cash. Destroying stuff, which costs money. Spending money. Woohoo! Mini game challenges. 40 Winks will feature a series of unique multiplayer minigames which can be replayed whenever the player wishes. Snail Games. Play as Gary for the very first time as you take part in these exciting challenges. Snail Racing. Use your powers as a turbocharged snail to race around arenas. Snail Pinball. Use your shell as a pinball and roll around the arena scoring points to beat the high score. Snail Maze. Negotiate a 3-dimensional maze on the surface of a brain sponge, leaving your snail trail behind to ensure that you know where you've been. Jellyfish Games. Jellyfishing. Run around with a net and capture as many jellyfish as you can. Jellyfish Milking. Keep the jellyfish happy by milking as many as possible. Clam Games. Clamshell Crescendo. Squidward conducts SpongeBob and Patrick as they jump on clamshells to release a musical cacophony of notes and rhythms. Clam Catching. Lasso your clams with your giant plunger and capture as many as you can before the timer runs out. Clam Riding. Race your clams against your friends to get the gold.
These ideas all sound pretty amazing and ambitious, but if you have played the game, you know that almost none of it was implemented. Let's take a closer look at the final product. SpongeBob SquarePants, creature from the Krusty Krab, begins on a quiet night in Bikini Bottom, and the French narrator explains that everyone in Bikini Bottom is fast asleep exploring the world of dreams. We then cut to SpongeBob snoozing in his pineapple, when he rolls over to reveal that his bed has been transformed into a grungy-looking race car. His subconscious mind takes control, and he drives the vehicle outside, crashing through his roof while still sleeping, to find a post-apocalyptic-looking racetrack. SpongeBob opens his eyes and spouts off a bunch of nonsense.
Hot dog, Daddy-O! My bed is transmogrified into a lean, mean racing machine. Time to put the pedal to the metal, the rubber to the road, and the sponge to the street!
Then, as the actual gameplay is ready to begin, he transforms into a nightmarish-looking version of himself. You will see several loading screens throughout this racing section that show off this disturbing art style in more detail. It feels pretty out of place, but the style is actually a reference to art by a man named Ed Roth. He drew various characters, such as Rat Fink, that rode around on hot rods just like the Bikini Bottom gang does in this level. Knowing this, it seems like a nice touch, especially in a game based on dreams. However, it's questionable that any kid who would have been playing the game would have understood, and it's possible it could have even terrified some kids that expected the usual SpongeBob adventure. Anyways, the gameplay begins right away, throwing you into a race with nothing but a quick blurb explaining the controls to guide you. It's a pretty straightforward driving segment from here, and doesn't even necessarily feel like a race, because the opponents aren't really on the track with you much, and when they are, they mostly just throw down obstacles. The race is really more against time. The only things you can really do to have a better chance at success is to avoid the crates on the track and try to hit every boost pad. It's a bit unclear if it helps that much though, as I hit a lot of boxes and missed a lot of boosts, but still won on my first try every time. You can also collect Z points throughout the track, as well as every other level in the game, and exchange them for bonus content on the main menu. Once the first race is complete, SpongeBob will revert to his normal self and celebrate his victory, before realizing he doesn't remember getting his license. Just to make sure, he pulls it out and admires it. But then a hot rod version of Plankton crashes into SpongeBob's car, sending the license flying. This is where you are first introduced to the platforming segments of the game. You'll have to chase down SpongeBob's license throughout this level, completing minor challenges that teach you the basic actions you'll be doing throughout the game, like jumping across gaps, opening doors with a crank, and dashing into objects to slide them across the ground. When you finally do get the license back, it's back to the racing seat, this time against Patrick, or, excuse me, Piston Patrick. After that, there's another platforming level where you are collecting different parts of the car, after Plankton crashed into you again and destroyed it. The difference this time around is that you will have to fight enemies along the way. But quite honestly, this is barely a challenge. Most of them only take one hit, and the only real mix-up in the enemy variation is a bigger enemy with a shield that you have to dash into and then hit. You'll also learn to slam down on things like buttons and swing across larger gaps as the racing section of the game goes on. Once they teach you all these different mechanics, the way they set up various challenges and puzzles gets a little more interesting, but it still never feels difficult. After another race, a platforming segment, and then one final race, SpongeBob will cross the final finish line, and then drive straight into a pit, ending this part of the dream world. The name of the game in Creature from the Krusty Krab is Gameplay Variety. Every character you will play as has a slightly different style, and they usually have more than one type of level you'll play them in, such as SpongeBob's driving and platforming. After SpongeBob falls into the pit, we cut to Patrick asleep in his rock. His TV flicks on, startling him, and a newscaster appears to alert citizens that the dreaded Patrick is attacking the city. Patrick leaps into action, transforming into his alter ego, Starfish Man. This part of the game is all presented in a really cool cel-shaded comic book style, and it's pretty much just all platforming and fighting enemies with a few different powers, like Super Breath to knock down various paper-thin objects, or activate fans. This is probably my favorite portion of the game, but I will say it can also be the most boring and tedious, as you're doing the same things for what felt like a couple hours. The biggest thing that bothers me is that every few minutes you had to stop and answer payphones to get information that you likely already knew about how to play the game. For a kid playing for the first time, this may be fine, but for a seasoned gamer, this wears thin quick. Also, one thing I never completely understood while playing was that Patrick's suit would sometimes turn red and yellow, and then switch to blue. It's possible and even probable that this was explained at some point in the game, but I never caught what it meant. One of the funniest parts of this game is during the second part of Patrick's dream. Patrick saves a citizen from being run over by a train, but the citizen won't leave the tracks after being rescued, or even thank Patrick for the save because he is still in nothing but his underwear, and refuses to do anything until you bring him his clothes. So then you have to go around and collect these icons that represent clothing, like you did the car parts in SpongeBob's dream. After that, it's time for one final showdown with the dreaded Patrick, which is kind of a beat-em-up where you fight several waves of enemies. In the end though, Starfish Man doesn't even win the battle, and is defeated by being launched into space on a rocket. I guess that's kinda to be expected when Patrick is the hero, and also the villain? This game is weird. We then cut to the third and final playable character, Plankton, having a nightmare in his lab. He sits up remembering that he had stolen a crumb of Krabby Patty, and puts said crumb into a growth ray, turning it into a full-size Krabby Patty. But then it doesn't stop growing. Somehow, the increase in size has made the Krabby Patty sentient, turning it into the Creature from the Krusty Krab! To deal with the monstrous Patty, Plankton tells Karen to increase his size by 100, but Plankton being, well, a plankton, this size increase really only made him the size of every other normal citizen of Bikini Bottom. Seeing that the Krabby Patty is still far bigger than him, he runs out of the chum bucket, beginning the next gameplay style. This part of Plankton's dream is a pretty simple side-scrolling platformer, where you run away from the massive Krabby Patty, and use your freeze ray to help you along the way. It's so straightforward that I really don't know what more I can say about it. The rest of the game is pretty similar to the first half, swapping between characters and different playstyles. With SpongeBob, there's a free-falling level where you try to avoid obstacles, more platforming in the belly of an Alaskan bullworm, and an on-rails airplane dogfight. Patrick flies the rocket he was launched on in an on-rails segment, and then he fights through another beat-em-up-esque boss battle. And finally, Plankton grows to an enormous size, and you have to make like Godzilla and destroy Bikini Bottom, chasing the Krabby Patty that chased you along the way. I should also mention there are small mini-games that you will play between some levels, like destroying buildings with button combos as Plankton, and sorting green and yellow colored trash as SpongeBob, which for a colorblind person like myself is an absolute nightmare. All of the different dreams merge into one for an epic battle between Plankton and our yellow and pink heroes. Once Plankton is defeated by being shrunk down to his usual tiny self, the three suddenly find themselves in a white room with a doctor that has a Krabby Patty for a head. The doctor asks them about their peculiar dreams, and it is revealed that they had all eaten Krabby Patties before falling asleep that night. The doctor explains that Krabby Patties affect the subconscious in bizarre ways, before revealing himself to be a manifestation of the patty they all ate, and is therefore the one controlling their dreams. Throughout the entire game, you needed to collect these hidden sleepy seeds, and finding all of them for one character meant you would unlock that character to play as in this final race. It certainly adds some replayability. My first time through, I could only play as SpongeBob because I didn't find all the seeds. There are different endings for each character though, so if you want to see everything the game has to offer, you'll need them all. In SpongeBob's ending, he takes the Krabby Patty to the Krusty Krab, where an angry mob of hungry customers is demanding food. This seems pretty serious, as the hunger seems to have caused paralysis in all these fish. In all seriousness though, yikes. This reminds me of another similar issue in another certain SpongeBob game. SpongeBob chops up the big Krabby Patty into several normal-sized ones, and serves it to the customers. One angry patron demands one without relish, which SpongeBob is happy to oblige, until he notices he and everyone else has snail shells on their back. In Patrick's ending, he finds himself at the Krusty Krab, where everyone is celebrating his existence, I guess? And he is about to eat the Krabby Patty when it leaps off the table and out the door, causing him to hit his head. Finally, in Plankton's ending, Bikini Bottom is covered in Plankton's burger franchise empire that he created with the formula he got from the Krabby Patty, complete with massive statues of himself. He mocks the Krusty Krab, claiming victory and superiority. The Krabby Patty then appears and ominously states, "What the patty gives, the patty can taketh away." It then proceeds to drop massive patties on top of all of Plankton's restaurants, destroying them. At the end of each of these cutscenes for each character, another final scene will play where each character wakes up in another's dream, until it is revealed that the entire story and game was really Gary's dream all along, as he ate a patty before he fell asleep. Talk about a rough night. After the credits roll, we get one final cutscene where Gary wanders around Bikini Bottom, seeing SpongeBob pretend to drive to work, Patrick riding a kiddie ride rocket pretending to be a superhero, and Plankton smashing things in anger over the fact that he lost his Krabby Patty crumb. These moments all freak out Gary, as they remind him of his dream. He crawls back to the pineapple, and SpongeBob comes home with a Krabby Patty for the snail, which Gary is still strangely prepared to eat. But SpongeBob pulls it away, saying he shouldn't eat it before bed, because it will give him nightmares. Gary curls up to sleep and watches SpongeBob stand outside the bedroom door, when I swear the patty he's holding says something, and then an Alaskan bullworm crashes into the house and eats SpongeBob. Gary just closes his eyes, likely believing it was all another dream. Eat your heart out, Inception. And so, that ends the adventure. Like I said, I didn't play this version growing up, so it was definitely interesting finally seeing what it was like. While it certainly is not my favorite in the series, it does have a lot of redeeming qualities. I know some people don't like all the different styles they threw into the game, but I think the variety of gameplay is for the best, as I found myself getting really bored of some levels, but then they would shake things up with a new format and art style shortly after. It's absolutely different than all previous games, and so I understand that it's divisive. The biggest complaint I've heard from fans and critics alike is, it doesn't feel like a SpongeBob game. Which, yeah, I see their point. But if you really look closely, and play the whole thing through, you'll see lots of different bits of fan service that tie it all together. What the hell, Junior? And I mean, the entire game is set in a world of dreams, so it makes sense that the setting feels surreal and out of place. If you've been holding out on this game because you've heard bad things, give it a shot. There's a reason it's so beloved by a certain subsect of fans. So yeah, the game we got and the product they intended to make were very different all in all. Sure, the idea of exploring dreams stayed the same, but nearly everything else was changed. The idea of SpongeBob traversing his friends' dreams rather than his own was obviously shifted. Speaking of which, most of SpongeBob's friends that had planned dreams like Sandy, Mr. Krabs, and Squidward didn't even appear at all. The idea of SpongeBob teaming up with different characters in each dream didn't work out either, which means there was no real-time comedy conversations. The mini-games that did exist in the game were not based on more minor characters like they discussed, and as far as I'm aware, there was no cross-save bonuses for people who owned other Nickelodeon games. One thing that sort of stuck was the transformations for SpongeBob. though in a much smaller capacity. In SpongeBob's moveset, he would grow bull horns, turn into a weight, and stretch his arms really far to cross gaps. This is not really what was described in the game's pitch, but it's the closest thing to it. Besides Plankton's dream, the original concepts for each of the dreams were radically changed, and very little of the original, and in some cases better, ideas can be seen in the final release. Also, I'd just like to say it is a tragedy that Patrick was supposed to have a candy world for a dream in 2 different games, and each time the idea was dropped. Oh well, I guess we are sort of getting it in Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated's multiplayer mode. So yeah, Creature from the Krusty Krab is next to nothing like 40 Winks, but what we still got was still a pretty solid experience. You have to wonder what it would have been like had we gotten 40 Winks instead. But it was clearly too ambitious and way ahead of its time to be finished in a year, much less on the hardware that was available. Like Riders DX told me while I was working on this video, it's a bittersweet feeling to know and wonder what could have been. As far as the actual game we got, Blitz Games wanted to implement other ideas that never quite made it in, especially in the Wii version.
We had loads of fun ideas for wacky ways to use the controller, which is why the game features so many gameplay styles and minigames. But yes, there were many ideas that didn't make it through. Probably the main thing was the shooting ones. The controller with its pointer is great for shooting things, and we had various ideas along those lines. But ultimately, it's a cartoon license, and Nickelodeon were uncomfortable with shooting. It's not that we couldn't do it, but it had risk. If we went down that route and then were told it couldn't go in. When you're aiming for a launch title, you don't need to confront obvious approval worries. Andrew Oliver, 2007.
It certainly would have been cool to see this shooter-like gameplay, but that definitely would not have felt like SpongeBob. It's possible that this idea was sort of reused in the follow-up title Atlantis SquarePantis, in the form of shooting things with a camera, but perhaps we'll talk more about that game another day. Creature from the Krusty Krab's reception was definitely mixed, but leaned more towards the negative, especially with critics, IGN's Jack DeVries being one of the most harsh.
It lacks the charm, ocean theme, or even the humor that should come with a SpongeBob game. In fact, at many points, Creature from the Krusty Krab fails to be a game at all. Players are reminded almost constantly of how to do every basic maneuver for the platforming levels, almost like the developers invented the concept of double jumping. Puzzles are insultingly rudimentary, push this button, or destroy these crates. Kids these days are pretty stupid, but it's doubtful they need the game to halt and have the camera sweep through the level just to show them the only option in an entirely linear game. Ultimately, Creature from the Krusty Krab loses the charm and style of the property it's based on.
Anise Hollingstead of Game Zone said at the time,
"The bottom line is that this SpongeBob release isn't like previous SpongeBob games. It's not funny and it's not very fun to play. The levels are boring, the collectibles aren't interesting, and the mini-games are forgettable. If you are considering this for a Christmas gift, don't."
I can sort of see where these opinions are coming from, because the non-stop cutscenes and tedious tutorials several hours in did start to drive me nuts. But saying things like, "kids today are stupid," is not the way to get anyone to respect your opinion, especially the kids that the game was made for in the first place. In the end, I say that if you love the game, that's awesome. If you hate the game, that's fine too. But don't be that guy shouting it's garbage every chance you get. It's not my favorite, but I'm happy for the people who got enjoyment and happiness out of it. That's really all that matters. Blitz Games went on to create several more SpongeBob games over the years, the obvious one being Atlantis SquarePantis, but they also did Underpants Slam and Surf and Skate Road Trip. Unlike companies like Big Sky Interactive, Blitz Games never had any problems with THQ, and they were always on good terms. Leadership at THQ did change over time though, so that might have something to do with it. Over time, the quality of the games Blitz Games created and the IPs they were given to work with arguably went downhill. Over the years, they created Tak and the Guardians of Gross, an iCarly game, Puss in Boots, and they even helped with development on Epic Mickey The Power of Two. But aside from that, it mostly ended up being shovelware, like games based on The Biggest Loser and Michael Phelps. Their final product before shutting down was an alarm clock app based around Shrek. Kind of a depressing end if you ask me. But most of the employees went on to do better things. The Oliver twins in particular are still making games to this day, all these years later. Their most recent project is a Stadia game called Krata, based around creation. It kinda reminds me of a mix between Minecraft and other multiplayer games like Ark Survival Evolved, but still very much its own thing. The Olivers aren't the most recognized creators in the industry, but without their work on their NES games, or their later titles, gaming history would be a far less interesting subject. Over the years, the SpongeBob property has had many ups and downs, both in its video games and the show itself. Some of these games are almost universally loved, and others, like Creature from the Krusty Krab, are more scrutinized. Does that mean we should never see those games released again? No. I think Creature from the Krusty Krab, or even other less perfect licensed games, have even more of a reason to be remade, because there's an opportunity to make them better and fix the mistakes from the past. Maybe someday, THQ Nordic or a devoted fan will take notice of Blitz Games' original idea for 40 Winks, and use modern technology to make it a reality. It sounds like an amazing idea, and it is incredibly disappointing to know it never came to be. In the end, Creature from the Krusty Krab is one of the most different and interesting titles we have gotten, and though things went downhill after its release, today the future looks brighter than ever for the little yellow sponge.